I hope you all can see this T-shirt, okay? I'm going to read it to you. It says, Free Speech Movement, 50th Anniversary, Free Speech, FSM. Now I'm just going to turn my back, nothing personal. Hey, she made it! And it says, carry it on, right? You got that? This is the context, okay. This is a story that we could call it the radicalization of Marylee or not, whatever you want. But go back now to 1964 with me. I didn't cough so much then. And Berkeley, California. I'm a sophomore in college. And it happens that the students, typically a number of the students, they would have tables out around the edge of the campus where they would like either collect funds for some kind of organization, or they would sign people up to be politically active, like for civil rights, for demonstrations or whatever. And after a while, because of external pressures, the university decided they didn't want that to happen. And so they began closing them down. They began actually a couple of times taking away the tables, even once semi-arresting someone. And so there was, of course, a great reaction to this. And over a period of time, over weeks and even months, there would be gatherings on that giant plaza there in Berkeley every day. And then students would give speeches. And they would tell us what was really going on here. You know, and I never heard anything like that because I was like middle class from San Diego, where even the Democrats were just this side from communists, you know, so it just news to me. But every day I would listen to that, and it reached a point as the university continued in ways that are all too familiar to us these days to just do stupider and stupider things, until finally in the speeches that were given and all of the sort of feedback or feelings from 3,000 or 4,000 students each day, it was decided to have a sit-in. And the main speaker, a fellow named Mario Savio, gave this marvelous speech about how we must stop the machine, that you must put yourself on the gears and levers and bring it to a stop. And so that day we began marching in, because there's this gigantic administration building, and we're going to sit in. And, you know, Joan Baez is there, plinking away, we shall overcome, we shall overcome. And then as we're going in, she says, go in with love in your hearts. Well, I went in with terror in mind, friends. I can tell you that I'd never done anything like that. And I was scared to death. But, you know, one does this. And so I ended up, there were 785 of us eventually arrested, right? But I ended up with friends at the top floor, the 4th floor. And it was a long, thin corridor with an elevator in the middle and stair steps down. So this is one of my first terrors. I think if anybody cracks and everybody rushes to those exits, people will die. But we're sitting there, you know, quietly, and there are more experienced people who'd worked, for instance, in civil rights in Alabama and in Mississippi, and knew about how to behave. And they would sort of talk to us now and again about sort of being calm, and they taught us how to go limp. Because there's nothing that irritates police more than having this noodle person just dripping to the floor. Of course, we were nonviolent, and of course, in those days, the police didn't have tasers, so, you know. So, that just time passes hour after hour after hour. And up there on the 4th floor, we're wondering, you know, when are the police going to come and when are they coming for us? And about 3 a.m, the word trickles up that they are coming, and they start in the basement. And they work their way. And by the time they get to the 3rd floor, I can hear people. You can hear people yelling, and then you can hear them screaming. And if you've ever been in a semi-panic situation, you know the tone changes, right? And it becomes in itself frightening to hear that level of just hysteria, although nobody really broke. So the police come to our floor. And they read the riot act. There really is a thing, a riot act, you know, like you're not supposed to be there. And they start picking us up, and they come to me, and I just sort of noodle to the floor. And they sort of shove me in the elevator, and off you go. So there are a lot of complications, which I will spare you, but they eventually are taking us to jail. In these buses where, again, frighteningly, they have they have screened over the windows, newspaper. You think, what are they trying to hide? And we get to a prison, and it would be like going to Abbotsford, okay? There was quite a drive to something called Santa Rita prison that had been actually an internment camp for the Japanese. Not unlike Ferndale here, I believe, in Abbotsford, that was also an internment camp for the Japanese in World War II. So we get out, and they start processing us. They separate the men from the women, and they're processing us. And it was interesting because the staff, they weren't used to dealing with middle-class people who had twice as much education, and they couldn't figure out, since we were obviously so privileged, why on earth we were going to jail. They knew what jail was like. They worked there. And so we go through that, and after a while, I am with 60 other women in the sewing room, right? And it was lined with these treadle machines, because you got to teach those women something useful. Am I right? I mean, in 1964, let me tell you, even treadle machines were out of date then. But so we're sitting around, and tired, hungry. A number of people, like, they couldn't even go to the washroom, or they could go, but they couldn't pee because we were so, you had privacy in our lives, right? And so they'd come back desperate because they couldn't pee. So it had interesting aspects. And also one of the interesting things was the guards. I'm gay, so I think I can say this. These guards were the most dead butch people I'd ever seen in my life. And at the time, see, I was gay. I mean, my friends knew, but I don't know if it's got signs or something, but my fear was that they would realize I was gay, and they would take me off to some room, and I would, unspeakable things would happen, right? This is my false consciousness, okay, friends? But people did actually disappear now and again, and you didn't know why, and so you don't know. So I had these bizarre thoughts, and they were, as I say, so dead butch. They had, of course, those really attractive uniforms that even our RCMP women today have the same kind of ones, right? They never quite fit, and these were a subtle brown. And their hair, every single one of them, they looked identical. Every one of them had their hair like all greased up and done in what would be now a mullet, right? But in those days was a DA for duck's ass, right? And so they were all that way. And it was rather striking. And as like I said, I've never done this kind of thing before. And I was sitting, I didn't have any friends there really, but I was sitting next to this woman. I knew she was a grad student, which is, like really sophisticated. And she came from a very privileged background. Perhaps we would even say sheltered. And she's sitting there, and in come these guards walking around. And she says, in this absolutely penetrating voice, against really exhausted silence, she says, "I didn't know they let men into the women's section." So I said to her, "Myrna, they don't." And in an equally penetrating voice, she goes, "Oh, yeah." And then I was sitting next to another woman, because again, I'm at a high level of anxiety, but the woman on the other side of me, like, she's smiling, she's humming to herself, all this kind of thing of what, maybe I can talk to her, maybe I can deal with this terror. And so I said to her, like, how do you feel about it? She said, "Oh, it's great, it's great." And I said, "Well, why?" And it turns out she thought it was the revolution, because her dad was one of the very few confirmed communists in like all of Northern California, and so they had talked about it beforehand. She, this is it. This is so her dream was coming true. So eventually, I do get bailed out. And I had, in all of this, not just jail, but in these months, I had really learned a lot. I think I had become, that's just what you call either politicized or radicalized these days. And since then, I was in marches for civil rights. I was in, and not too many years later, here comes feminism. So I'm involved in that. I bring that along in my life. Or environmentalism, gay rights, all these things. But now, there's another battle to come, friends. It's got to be happening more and more. And it's ageism, right? It's attitudes toward older people. And you know the facts. I won't give you the lecture, but the poverty levels of poorer people, the housing, the health problems, all of that, particularly for women. So the feminism comes along, right? And so I'm going to march if it comes to that. I'll go limp if it comes to that, if I'm not already limp. I'll do all those things. I'll have a committee meeting. We can form one after the show tonight, friends, if you want to. But that's what now has to be done. Because it's not just those stats. It's also, like, personally, like you walk into a room as a senior and you just kind of disappear. Gray hair, disappear, got nothing to say. Or the other one is you lose your name. I have been called Hun more in the last 2 or 3 years that since I was 5 years old, right? You're Hun until you're 5, and then when you're 65, 70, you're Hun again. So you lose that too. And the trouble is you also turn that on yourself. Because when I was at the free speech movement, we had a whole weekend and all this, and I was at the hootenanny, because you have to have that, right? And so I go up to the bar, and there's this fellow there, nice looking guy, and he starts, what else can I say, hitting on me, right? Trying to get acquainted, chatting me up, whatever phrases you might use these days, I don't know them. But anyway, so as I'm walking away, because, you know, gay or otherwise, I'm not interested, I'm saying to myself, Marylee, that old guy hit on you. And when I get to the table, I figure out the arithmetic, that old guy was 2 years younger. So, the battle comes on, it's got to happen, but I want to assure you tonight that whatever and however, we shall overcome. Thank you.